Okay, great. So before I jump into it here, let's go ahead and give a big shout out and a big thanks to our sponsors. Sorry, so our sponsors are Altera, Bad Elf, Concert Tech, Esri, New Edge, Nearmap, HEB, Tinriz, and Atmos Energy. So thank you very much for your sponsorship of Urissa, Texas. We greatly appreciate it. Today we have with us Carrie Brennan. Carrie's a GISP, and an EMP, and a product manager for public safety, GIS content and mapping with Geocom. Carrie has almost 30 years of GIS experience as a consultant, trainer, and product manager with focus in providing solutions to local, state, and federal governments, especially in the areas of land records, utilities, and public safety. A deep-seated desire to ensure that GIS solutions are easy and accessible to all users is a passion for Carrie, who is very active in the GIS and geospatial communities, including being past president of Urissa, thank you very much, and a member of the faculty for both Urissa and NINA education groups. Carrie, I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I apologize. I went to click away on the recording and I moved the slide forward when you were graciously thanking all of the corporate sponsors. And as a proud Urissa member, I can say that your corporate sponsors are awesome. And can I just say how excited I am to be part of the Urissa, Texas speaker series today. So thank you for inviting me. So today I'm going to be talking about Z-axis and indoor maps, the intersection of location for public safety. So I'm just going to quickly go through a little bit here and talk to you a little bit about Geocom and who we are in case you are not familiar. So Geocom is one of the largest public safety GIS companies in the United States, helping like over 100 million people stay safe. We've worked with 17 statewide next generation 911 projects. Over 1,500 jurisdictions across the country are utilizing our GIS data management solutions. And we've done over 1 million quality control checks completed on GIS data, but that's really not the focus of the talk today. Really, what I'm talking about is that important? Well, really, it's an important topic today because we are at the nexus of a change in the way that we look at data today. So the majority of you today on this call are probably familiar with next generation 911. In the last month, 911 celebrated its 55th birthday. So 55 years ago, the very first 911 call took place in Haleyville, Alabama. And that started with, I'm going to say, a relatively low-tech system for having a single number to call for public safety, to call for police, fire, or EMS. Over time, we have changed this where now we've integrated in mapping, and over the last 20 plus years, we've really started to evolve into what we refer to as next generation 911. That's not what this talk is about, but next generation 911 is where we're essentially replacing that plain old telephone line technology with newer IP-based technology, and we're utilizing GIS as core functionalities for doing spatial call routing, and that's fantastic. We now use road center lines, address points, and polygon boundaries to work with this data or with the call routing. But we have what I will refer to as a vast unknown, which is indoor spaces. And depending on which jurisdiction you live in today, over 80% of 911 calls are placed from cell phones. Now, depending on where you live in the United States, I know I work with some jurisdictions actually in the great state of Texas, where they say over 92, 93% of all of their 911 calls coming in are from cell phones. Maybe some other areas are a little bit lower. That's why we say that the average is about 80%. There is a study, and I've got further statistics a little bit later on. I repeat these statistics on a slide further down, that says that over 80% of our lives are spent indoors. And if you think about the way that you spend your day, that's really pretty true. So when we correlate these two together, a 911 call initiated from inside of a building does not provide actionable location intelligence with regards to the location of that call. And the problem is that fatalities have occurred as a result of it. I don't have the link on this slide, but there's a CNN news story about a young man who called 911. He was suffering from bad flu symptoms late 2019, early 2020, and called 911 from his dorm room at a college campus, and they could not find him. And unfortunately, he perished. More than likely, he had COVID. And, it was unknown at that time what he died of. He died of, respiratory distress at the time. But because he was in a multi-story building, they didn't know where he was. So what we need to do is come up with good dispatchable locations. And today, indoor mapping is that vast unknown. Less than 1% of indoors has been mapped for public safety. So when we start talking about the definition of dispatchable location, a dispatchable location is the validated street address of a 911 calling party, plus that additional information such as the suite, apartment, or similar information necessary to adequately identify the location of the caller. Honestly, that can get all the way down to the room number, or if you're in a large event space like a stadium or an arena, it could honestly get down to the section and seat number. For 911 calls placed in multiple story buildings or campus environments, dispatchable location will typically require the floor number and room information along with the addition of the street address. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is related to NENA standards and like ERISA, NENA is a professional association for public safety and 911 professionals. It stands for the National Emergency Number Association. Their website is nena.org, N-E-N-A. And you can go out there and they have all of their standards and informational documents out there. And I would highly recommend going out and taking a look at the informational document on 3D, as well as the GIS data model and the civic location data exchange format documents. Those are three really good documents to take a look at. So why is dispatchable location important in 2D when we're talking about 911? When you make a 911 call, typically what happens is in the Emergency Communications Center, or the ECC, a location pops up on the telecommunicator's map So you get a phone icon or that blue dot on the map, and you get a location and a circle of confidence, if you will. So we've got the blue dot. In this case, it's located with an icon with a phone on it. And then that circle around it is that confidence level of plus or minus, say, 50 meters, which is great. We can pretty much get an idea of where that call is coming from. We know that it's initiated from within what probably looks like a single-story barn, maybe. But that call actually could be initiated from a half a dozen other buildings in this rural farm environment. Thankfully, it looks like from the aerial photography, most of these buildings appear to be single-story. That makes it pretty easy in a relatively flat rural environment. But when we're talking about more urbanized areas, how does it change when we're working in a more three-dimensional environment? Well, dispatchable location is incredibly important when we move into three-dimension. So again, that same phone call is coming in, but now we're in an urbanized area. So we're looking now at a 911 call coming in from the location on the left-hand side, and the left-hand image on the screen. Where is that call coming from? Well, I know the address of that building, but when I look at the oblique imagery, that's a 20-story building. Which floor is that coming from? And that can be a challenge for frontline first responders, first on scene, to know where an emergency is coming in. So a police, fire, or EMS unit may arrive at this building. They go to the front desk. Where's the emergency? The person at the front desk goes, what emergency? And having to search 20 floors of an office building can be a real challenge, and that delays response times. If we can reduce response times by even a minute, we can save up to 10,000 lives in a year. So by adding in technologies that are able to assist in getting first responders to an emergency, by providing technology to get them there faster, this is the whole point of it. Now, the FCC mandated that the major carriers start to provide Z-axis information to 911 centers. And as of 2021, Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T all started delivering Z-axis information as part of their ALI stream. The ALI stream is the location information that comes in as part of your as part of the location when you make a 911 call. So what's coming in is this information. So you get that blue dot on the map, which comes in as latitude and longitude. And then that Z-axis information is being delivered as height above ellipsoid. Now, I'm a geographer by trade, and height above ellipsoid, where I live here in Indiana at my house, is a -33. That's a challenge for anybody who is not a geographer. That's a challenge for anybody who has to do math on the fly as well. So what we need to do is be able to convert this information into something actionable. So what I've got up here is what needs to happen when we receive this information. And this diagram is a diagram that floats around the internet often, but this is really what is happening when we're bringing in this X and Y and Z-axis information. So the Emergency Communication Center is receiving values in a height above ellipsoid through the ALI stream or through the data stream that comes in with the 911 call. This is essentially the measurement of the distance between the caller's location and the model of the Earth's surface. So this green dashed line here, which is the ellipsoid model. The ellipsoid model is just that. It is a perfect model of the Earth's surface. However, the Earth's surface is not a perfect ellipsoid in reality. There are hills and valleys, mountains, streams. In order to make the height above ellipsoid useful, we need to translate this into a measurement that is more useful and make it into something like height above terrain. The height above terrain measurement is the distance from the Earth's surface to the caller's location. And then that can be used to basically measure what the caller's location is, especially in an urbanized area, and relate that to what the caller's floor level would be. Now, we also have the mean sea level. And the mean sea level is the distance from the mean or the average sea level and is provided by wireless handsets to 911 on occasion. The difference between the height above ellipsoid and the height above mean sea level is based on a geoid height. And this is a really technical description of what's going on. But it's important to understand this, that there's a lot of math going on in these things. So if you are receiving your height above ellipsoid, the whole point of this description is that you need to be able to do a translation process in order to take that height above ellipsoid and turn it into actionable GIS data that your telecommunicators can use and understand. Now, taking that height above ellipsoid and converting it into caller location doesn't just mean converting it into height above terrain, but you need to apply it utilizing the Z-axis information that comes in and applying it based on what the terrain is at every given building. So because we're in an area where there are hills and valleys, of course, in Texas, you get into hill country, you get near the shore down around Houston and Galveston, there are different elevations throughout Texas. And we've got people from Idaho on the call who have mountains in the areas or in Idaho. I'm in Indiana where we have, a 700-foot elevation change between the entire state. So we're relatively flat. So the height above ground can be inconsistent across different locations. It can be inconsistent between different buildings that are very close in very close proximity to one another. So you need to know this data at specific locations. So you want to have building footprints and be able to measure what the height above ellipsoid is at every building footprint. So in the example that I've got up on the screen here, you'll see that we've got a shop that has a 200-meter height above ellipsoid. When we convert that into height above terrain, the height above terrain is 2.5 meters. That's translating to being the first floor of this shop. However, when we convert it for the office building, that converts to 18 meters height above terrain. So that's actually on the 3rd floor. So there's different translations in this case. So again, you want to be able to have a translation system in place that's going to take into consideration all of the different locations across your jurisdiction and make sure that you are getting the right values at the right locations. So this is just another example where we're taking that blue dot, we're placing it onto the Earth's surface. We've got our location coming in. We're measuring out what that 3D cone is. The FCC has mandated that the X and Y needs to be plus or minus 50 meter accuracy, but the Z axis has to be plus or minus 3 meters, or essentially 1 floor of the spatial accuracy that you are getting. So when we look at this one, we're measuring out and we're seeing that this is actually coming in at a specific address. We know that it's on the 2nd floor. And because we've done our mapping, we know that it's actually coming in from room 202. Now, the next couple of slides that I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you a solution that Geocom has actually just released in the last couple of days. But I want to be very clear that this is a Geocom solution, but there are other vendors out there that are doing or will be doing other solutions. You can also work through and develop your own solutions. So to be vendor agnostic, just to be clear. So Geocom has a vertical location service that we are releasing that is converting latitude and longitude and height above ellipsoid or orthometric heights into dispatchable locations that is comprised of ground estimated street addresses, building names, and floor levels, along with the 3-dimensional buildings and 911 caller visualizations. And this will be integrated into a number of third-party applications, typically going into computer-aided dispatch location or computer-aided dispatch applications, along with other applications, or potentially, if you are interested, you could integrate this directly into your 911 center. So in this case, the alley stream is coming in. It gets fed directly into the user interface. The address is pulled from the X, Y, and Z access location. It's pulling up the building name if it is available, the height that comes in after it's been translated from the height above ellipsoid into a height above terrain, and then the estimated caller location. You'll notice that it says that it is a low accuracy estimate. As more and more indoor maps are getting built out, those will be surveyed as well with good location and proper Z-axis information per floor. So these will become much more highly accurate buildings as well. So they'll become higher accuracy buildings. So it becomes very useful because we get tactical 911 caller visualization and mapping. It can be run standalone in existing CADs or as a responder solution. So telecommunicators, even first responders, can now see this type of visualization in the 911 center, in the ECC, or potentially in mobile units as well. And then this is just kind of a rotating view of where that caller estimation would be. So, additionally, 3D tactical mapping can be built in to include knowing where line of sight would be for things like potential active shooter incidents, like if there was an active shooter on the top of a building, utilizing 3D renderings of where what a shooter could see from the top of a building as well. And then as well, because many local jurisdictions already have things like building footprints, people are starting to integrate in indoor maps and utilize 3D renderings. We can integrate in locally authoritative data into these applications that will enable additional accuracy for translations, which only enhances the accuracy of this data. You want to ensure that you have the most accurate data available to you. And then the 3D renderings that we are looking at are actually utilizing Esri's 3D web scenes, which are very often utilizing open source 3D web scenes, but they can also utilize 3D views from your own local LiDAR site or LiDAR flights, excuse me, as well as feature tags and 3D meshed data. Now I'm going to switch over and start talking a little bit about the integration with indoor maps, because what I was showing you here were really just shells of buildings, not specifically data that has indoor maps built into them. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, indoor maps is the next big thing when it comes to building out indoor, that vast unknown of indoor spaces. So this is a little animation that I want to show you and talk to you about. So when you call 911, very often a telecommunicator will receive a dot on the map. We refer to it as the blue dot on the map. And we have content without context. So I know the phone number and essentially the location of the call coming in. I might have an address point coming in of that location, but not necessarily a whole lot more, other than the location of this call is south of West College Avenue and east of 1871. But beyond that, there's not a lot of additional information that the telecommunicator is receiving. And a 911 caller may not be able to communicate a whole lot of additional information about the situation that they are in. And adding in indoor maps adds a lot of additional context to the 911 call. So I'm just going to play this little swipe video for you. So you will see that now not only do I know that the 911 caller is calling from a school, but they're also calling from the auditorium. And so I have a lot more information at my fingertips as a frontline telecommunicator to provide to police, fire, and EMS. I can tell that there is a major entrance to the auditorium that is near where the caller is coming from. I may not want to route first responders through that door, depending on what type of emergency I think it is, but I can let them know that there are other major entrances. In this particular example, I don't have displayed on here where there are public safety assets like fire extinguishers, AEDs, Knox boxes, but those typically are always mapped out and available. I can build out routing as well. So as you can see, this adds a lot of context to a first responder's ability to add to the communication to what's going on. So when we start talking about 911 callers positioning for indoors, we're adding additional context to where the caller is coming from by adding additional information as layers underneath the location of that caller. So again, same building, caller is calling from the auditorium. This really creates an opportunity to map 911 calls so that we have additional information. So when we start zooming in, we can see a lot more detail about the building. Again, as you can see, we can start to see additional information about the room structure, where there are additional assets, where there are doors, where there are different types of rooms near the auditorium. When we start building out things like IoT sensors within buildings, and since the average person spends about 80% of their life indoors, and we know that a call came from inside of this building, we start to see we can have occupancy detectors showing inside of a building potentially. You know, if we have indoor positioning systems and occupancy detectors turned on, we can start to see clusters of where people are inside of buildings, especially in an emergency situation. This can be incredibly helpful for first responders to know, you know, in a classroom situation, in an active shooter situation, where there might be clusters of students hiding. That's a horrible situation, but unfortunately that is a real world situation that could be happening. We also have the opportunity to route first responders that could help reduce response times even more, or make it easier for first responders to take the safest route into a classroom situation or into any building situation, whether it is a shopping mall or a stadium, an event center of any type of, or any type. The same could apply when you are doing wayfinding and working to get out of a building that you may not be familiar with. As I'm looking at the attendee list today, I see a lot of familiar names, people that I know I have been to conferences and events with in different states, in different locations, where we're all at event spaces that we are not necessarily familiar with. If we need to evacuate from a convention center, do we always necessarily know how to get out of those spaces? No, not necessarily. But having an intelligent map potentially on our phone that can use wayfinding and enable us to get out of the building could be very beneficial, especially in an emergency situation. And all of this is built on having good base indoor mapped data available. Now, what I've been showing you so far is all built on two-dimensional data. Today, most of us and most first responders, most telecommunicators want to see a two-dimensional map. However, we definitely want to build all of this data with three-dimensional information in place. What I mean by that is, even though what I was previously showing you on the slide was a two-dimensional map of a single floor of a building, we want to have all of this data intelligent built out by floor so that we can quickly and easily render the data by floor, first floor, second floor, floors below ground, but we need to have it 3D intelligent so that when we are looking at that Z-axis data and a call comes in from the third floor, the call will automatically draw the third floor of a building. I would say that today, most telecommunicators may not be ready to sit at their console with virtual reality glasses on and, you know, be in a gaming world, if you will, looking at building data in a three-dimensional space, as we're looking at on the screen today. That's today. 24 months, 36 months down the road, who knows where we will be? Technology is moving so quickly that we could be in a world where we want to have that available. So when you start a project to work with indoor mapping data, you absolutely want to be taking on a project where you're building out your base data with 3D in mind. So that means serving your data out and taking into consideration when you start building out indoor maps that you are building it with floor height in mind. And Tim, I see your questions in the chat dialog box, and I will be answering those at the end of the session for you. Don't worry about that. So now, when it comes to indoor mapping, we do have some significant challenges. The reason for this is there are over 125 million buildings in the United States. And 125 million buildings is probably a low estimate. Now, having said that, we're not going to build out necessarily every single 125 million buildings in the United States to be an indoor map. What I mean by that is most single-family homes probably don't need an indoor map built for them to go into public safety. And this is where I'm going to do a slight tangent in my conversation here. When we talk about building out indoor maps for public safety, think of this kind of as a pyramid when it comes to building out data for any of your GIS. You never want to build your data out for a single purpose. If you're going to build out your GIS data for public safety, you absolutely also need to build it out to be used for facilities management, space management, any other uses that your local enterprise can use it for. And the reason that you want to do that, you want to build it out so that it's an intelligent, actionable GIS data set. At Geocom, we utilize the Esri ArcGIS Indoors data model. There are other data models that you can utilize. It doesn't have to be the ArcGIS Indoors data model. It can be a data model of your choice, but I highly recommend that you utilize a vector data set that can be quickly and easily updated. But you want to do it so that it can be utilized in multiple departments, if at all possible. There's cost benefits to that because it can be utilized in multiple different offices. Of course, being a public safety professional, I'm going to think GIS for public safety top of mind, but keep in mind that you don't build road center lines or address points just for one use. You build them for multiple different offices in your enterprise to use as well. So you want to do this for multiple different offices again. So keep that in mind. And you want to work with building owners, building operators, and you want to start this out as a project that has prioritization of buildings. So I will be happy to share with Matt, and he can share out with everybody on this call a white paper from Denko 911. They have done a really great job with indoor maps. They have over 250, almost 300 indoor maps that they have worked on and built out. They started, their priority maps were schools. They needed to have schools built out for their telecommunicators. Then now they're working with government buildings. Now they're starting to work with hotels. So they've prioritized and picked what type of buildings they want to work with. That started in 2019. As you can see, it's not a short time project. It's a long-term project that they are working with. So just keep that in mind. This is just a slide of Geocom's process, but basically we use AI and machine learning patented process where we convert the data into actionable GIS data. You can utilize, any software. I think most of us use Esri or an open source software platform to do this. But really what you want to do is you want to take some type of source GIS data and convert it into, again, that actionable GIS data. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what type of floor plan resources do you want to utilize. What I've got up on the screen here are a couple of different types of floor plan resources. Very often what you're going to do is you're going to find out that you start talking to building owners and they go, oh yeah, I've got a PDF, or, I've got a PDF of my building, the floor plans. So can you use that? That is a good possibility of something that you can do. I know that that's something that, from where I stand, that's what we utilize. The plans on the left are what we would consider an effective floor plan. The reason for this is it has all of the rooms clearly marked. It has all of the doors clearly marked with door swings. This is just one floor that is on the screen, but it does have every floor as a nice clean layer on the map. The image on the right is what we would consider an ineffective floor plan. The reason for this is a copy of a copy. You can see that it's kind of skewed. There aren't any door swings. The doors are actually just open spaces. If you look really closely, you can see that it's been handwritten on and then re-photocopied. When we geo-reference this to the aerial photography, it's very difficult to to figure out if it would scale properly because you don't know if it's skewed or not. So that's what we would consider an ineffective floor plan. Now, what happens if you have absolutely no floor plan resources at all? Well, there are alternatives as well. One of the things that you can do is actually utilize 3D scanning technology. So this is going out and using a LiDAR scanner. There are a number of different types of LiDAR scanning tools available, from very high-end GeoSlam and higher scanning device. Pro 13 and 14s now have LiDAR scanners in them that you can utilize with software applications on them. You can go in and scan an entire building and then use software applications to convert that into a CAD drawing that could then be converted into a actionable GIS data set. And in a pinch, this will work. You have to take into consideration that some of these scanners, especially the lower end scanners, may add some skew to your data, but it is a way to render your data, get it into buildings if you and then a recommendation that I always make is that you utilize standardized symbology across the board for all of your public safety indoor mapping. So we utilize NAPSIG symbol sets for the majority of any of our public safety symbols. Where we don't have NAPSIG symbols for things, we utilize Esri symbology, like industry standard symbology. So there isn't a NAPSIG symbol for baggage claim. So we use an Esri industry symbol for that. And then color coding, we color code each room with a unique color code so that everybody that looks at your mapping data knows that bathrooms are blue, open spaces are gray, utility rooms are kind of that pinkish color. It makes it very easy so that every person looking at your GIS data knows exactly what the symbol set looks like. And then kind of second to last slide is, this is just an example in an application. This happens to be a geocom application, but again, this should be in any of your public safety applications, whether it's your CAD mapping application or anything like that. It's important that your GIS data be floor aware. So on the right side here, we have a floor picker so that the telecommunicator can actively and interactively quickly change floors and utilize this data quickly while they are on a 911 call. And now I am open to questions and discussions.
Carrie, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. Quite a bit of information. So we have about 7 minutes left in the meeting. We'll go ahead and jump into the questions really quick. Typically, we do end right at 1 o'clock. If you do have to bounce off, or we do understand. However, I think since this was such a information-heavy presentation, we can go ahead and field questions, a couple minutes after, if that's okay with Carrie. So we have a couple questions here. Tim has been waiting patiently. So Tim, your first question here was, you mentioned that as more buildings have rooms identified, they will be surveyed. Do you mean witnessing the location or actual engineer surveying?
So the best I can answer, Tim, is neither. What I mean by surveyed in this case is utilizing a tool that will actually determine what the floor elevation is. So I work with a partner company called NextNav that has a tool that converts the height above ellipsoid to a height above terrain location. And they have an API, so at basically any floor, you could be on the 30th floor of a building, open up their application, and it would tell you what the height above terrain of the 30th floor of a building would be. And as more people survey that information can be utilized to enhance the indoor map data, is essentially what I mean. To your second question, I really don't see the metaverse or other VR coming into play soon, although I have heard that, there are some telecommunicators that might like to see that 3D view of a building. Telecommunicators, though, have on average between 6 and 7 screens of information up. They already have information overload. So, it's a matter of how much information we want to provide to them without completely overwhelming them, right? The key is to give them enough information without overwhelming them.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Carrie. So Tim actually had another question here. So does NENA, N-E-N-A, have an indoor mapping priority standard, or are the priorities based on the individual 911 responders' needs?
So NENA does not have an indoor mapping priority standard. They do have their 3D, let me pull up the exact name of that document. They do have their 3D requirements for locating. I just pulled it over. Hopefully you can see it. The NENA requirement for 3D location data for E911 and Next Gen 911. And this goes through and discusses all of the intricacies of 3D location data for both Enhanced 911 and Next Gen 911. But it does talk about indoor mapping to a degree in this particular, in this document.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's actually a question here from Tariq. Says, what's the best iPhone app for, I believe, the LiDAR that you were mentioning? Let me just throw a response in here. I actually use Polycam. It's a pretty good one. But do you have any other thoughts on that, Carrie?
I was going to say it depends on what you are mapping. Polycam is a very good one. Sitescape is another one. It depends on if you are mapping out very large spaces. The iPhone has a 5-meter resolution on it, whereas something like a GeoSlam has more of a 30-meter resolution. So it's able to capture more pixels, or excuse me, more. It can capture more points in its point cloud in a larger space. So if you're capturing, like, say, a high school gymnasium or something larger, the iPhone, whether it's Sitescape or Polycam or some of those other ones, may have trouble capturing those larger spaces.
Yeah, great, thank you. So I think Tim's got a comment there about the 13th floor hotels. But yeah, so that seems to be all the questions in the chat box. We are kind of rounding out the hour here. You know, it doesn't appear to be any further questions, so I think we can safely go ahead and close out the webinar. Carrie, thank you again so much for your time. This was a wonderful presentation. And just to kind of close out here, if you are interested in volunteering, please check out this QR code here or go to Eurista Texas website. And once again, thank you for your attendance.
Thank you all very much. I hope to see many of you at either a Eurista Texas event when I get down to Texas, or at the Eurista GIS Pro Conference in Columbus, Ohio.
Great. Thank you, Carrie.